One of the most common questions when separating in Ontario is how do we divide our property? In some situations, this can be very complicated, but for the average couple in Ontario, we're dealing with a numbers game and a very simple mathematical formula, which we call the equalization of net family properties. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, we need to understand that married couples are treated differently than non-married couples, or what we often call common law couples. In this video, we're talking only about married couples. Many people believe that everything is just split 50-50 and this solves the problem. But our law sees it differently. What we're really concerned about is making sure that the wealth accumulated by the spouses during the marriage is shared equally between them when they separate. At the end of the marriage, each spouse will have what's called a net family property assigned to them, or an NFP for short. And the first step in solving this problem is figuring out each spouse's NFP. To do this, we have to pay attention to two very specific dates, which are the date of marriage and the date of separation, or what we also call the valuation date. For each of those dates, both spouses will calculate every asset they owned, less any debts or liabilities. At that point, both spouses will calculate the growth in their wealth between those two dates. That growth is considered the NFP. Now, let's see how this works in practice by looking at Christina and Joe, who have recently separated. We usually start by looking at the date of separation values because this information is usually more available. So we see here that Christina has a house, a car, some savings, and an RRSP. She also has credit card debt and a mortgage. Now we calculate the totals, subtract the debts from the assets, and we see that Christina was worth $540,000 at the date of separation. And now we do the same thing for the date of marriage. So we see that Christina had a car, some savings, and a music collection. She also had some credit card debt and a student loan. We again calculate the totals and subtract the debts from the assets. And we see that Christina came into the marriage with $40,000. Now remember that we're only looking at the growth in wealth between these two dates. So if Christina came into the marriage with $40,000 and left with $540,000, this means that her wealth grew by $500,000, and this is Christina's NFP. While Christina was organizing all of her documents, Joe was doing the same thing, and he determined that he came into the marriage with $10,000 and left with $60,000. This means that his wealth grew by $50,000. Now that we've figured out Christina's and Joe's NFPs, we can solve our very simple math problem. We take the higher NFP, subtract the lower NFP, divide that figure in half, and this tells us the equalization payment owing by Christina to Joe. Now you'll see that when Christina makes the equalization payment of $225,000, her NFP drops to $275,000. At the same time, Joe's NFP goes up to $275,000. They both leave the marriage with the same value. Or in other words, they're equalizing the wealth they accumulated during the marriage. Now, this was a very, very simple example as to how equalization works in Ontario. And sometimes real life truly is that simple. But usually there are more complications, more exceptions, more rules, and more legal terms that seem to come out of nowhere. It's always important to speak to a knowledgeable family lawyer who can give you advice on the specifics of your situation.